It's 6 o'clock in the evening on the 6th of June 2000. A man is driving through Blacklion, County Cavan, just 20 minutes from his home in Enniskillen in Northern Ireland, when he spots over a dozen uniformed Gardaí lining the path. They flag him down, and he pulls the blue BMW into the side of the road. The guards had received a tip-off that over £10,000 worth of heroin, cannabis and ecstasy was being smuggled across the border in a blue BMW. Now, the guards wanted to search the car. The driver, Gerry McGinley, becomes agitated as Gardaí explain that he's going to be detained, and the car, which belongs to his wife, will be searched. He starts to shout that he is being hassled or set up. He's handcuffed and placed in the back of a squad car, where he threatens to have a Garda shot and aggressively sings Republican songs as they make the 20-minute journey to the Garda station in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim. When they arrive, Gardaí search his person for drugs but find nothing. With his patience wearing thin, an irate Gerry McGinley hops up from his chair and runs at the wall, headbutting it and injuring himself. The guards arrest him in connection with a package discovered underneath the passenger seat of his car. However, it is not the £10,000 worth of heroin that they had been promised, but a minor amount of cannabis resin and ecstasy, with a street value of less than £800, as well as cooking spices made to look like heroin. Gerry gives a statement maintaining his innocence, claiming that the drugs were planted. He is released on bail and returns to his home in Enniskillen to wait for a court date. During this time, he makes repeated phone calls to the Gardaí, insisting that he has been set up and demanding to know the informant's name. In one call, he asks the officer to get a pen before giving her a list of names, stating, "If anything happens to me, hand these names into the authorities." 2 months later, Gerry McGinley is a missing person. When a person is killed in Ireland, the Gardaí turn to the forensic examiners of the Technical Bureau. For 25 years, I was one of them. I'm John Sweetman. At crime scenes, I learned to listen to what the evidence was saying and what the killer was trying to silence. A smudged print, a misplaced everyday object, the smallest detail that revealed the truth. Now, in this GoLoud original podcast, I return to some of Ireland's most compelling cases. This is Lines of Enquiry, a podcast that follows the evidence and reveals the story behind each case. In this episode, the murder of Gerry McGinley and the scandalous trial of blackmail, illicit love affairs, sex tapes, and the IRA. Julie and Gerry McGinley were a young married couple. She was 29 and he was 34. They lived with their 2 young daughters in the sparsely populated Derryrahan, 5 miles outside Enniskillen town in County Fermanagh. Their bungalow was down a small country lane just wide enough for one car, with sloping farmland on one side and dense hedgerows along the other. In Fermanagh, as in the rest of the north, the decades past had been lived with the Troubles as a daily part of life. But the Good Friday Agreement had started change. By 1999, paramilitary activity had begun to wane, but the legacy of violence lived on, across the towns and villages, and in the memories of the people. Gerry and Julie had both grown up during the Troubles, a period of civil unrest and sectarian conflict in the north. A time when the influence of the Provisional IRA was widespread, and with that came gun running, smuggling, and violence. As a young girl, Julie was a victim of the 1987 Poppy Day bomb. 12 people were killed and 63 injured when a bomb planted by the IRA exploded in Enniskillen during a Remembrance Sunday ceremony. Julie was 16 at the time, and she was separated from her younger brother when the bomb exploded. She searched for him by turning over bodies in the street. He was eventually found receiving treatment in the hospital, and Julie was also treated for minor cuts. In December of 1999, as the rest of the world prepared for the millennium, there was a crisis in the McGinley household. After 5 years and 2 young daughters together, Gerry had discovered that his wife had been unfaithful, and he kicked her out. Julie and the children went to live with her father, while Gerry returned to his family home 12 kilometres away across the border in Manor Hamilton, County Leitrim. Nestled among the glens of northern Leitrim, Manor Hamilton is a pretty setting with a backdrop of mountains and lakes that makes it popular among hill walkers and outdoor types. Gerry's parents, Betty and Gerry Sr., were well liked in the town and known for working hard on their chicken and road haulage businesses. After returning home, Gerry took off his wedding ring. Both Julie and Gerry saw other people during their split. Gerry would say, "I can do what she can do," and so he began seeing Mary Maguire, who was also from Enniskillen. Despite the couple's separation and new partners, Gerry called Julie countless times day and night. In some of these calls, he threatened to take his own life. Gerry had a history of mental health struggles. A few years prior, in October 1997, Julie had woken up to a shout. The bedroom was lit up by the headlights of their car, shining through the window. Outside in their garden, by his daughter's swing set, Julie saw her husband as he attempted to take his own life. She ran outside and quickly intervened. Gerry made a slow recovery and was nursed back to health by Julie. A report from the community mental health team at the time said, "I am not reassured that there will not be future crisis." In other phone calls, Gerry threatened to burn the house down. He told Julie that he had plenty of people to do his dirty work for him, and he claimed to be in the IRA. After a few weeks apart, Gerry and Julie decided to get back together. They would call their brief separation their month of madness. Gerry remained intensely jealous of the men Julie saw during their separation. He was determined to get even, as he put it. He poured yellow paint on the windows of one man's property, and he headbutted the man's car. Gerry once stood outside the kitchen window of his own home, holding a gun. He told Julie he was going to shoot one of the men she had been with. He left, but came back a few minutes later, asking her to wash the car. The woman Gerry had been seeing during their separation, Mary Maguire, also had trouble adapting to life after Gerry and Julie's reconciliation. She did not accept that Gerry had ended things with her. She called him so often he had to get a new phone number. On St. Patrick's Day in the year 2000, Gerry and Julie went out to the Fort Lodge Hotel in Enniskillen. Across the busy bar, they spotted Mary Maguire. She stuck 2 fingers up to Julie in the V sign. Then she ran her finger under her neck in a throat-slitting gesture. When Julie went up to the bar to get another drink, Gerry overheard someone call his wife a stupid bitch and say to her that he would cut her throat. When he went to intervene, Mary Maguire caught hold of his jumper and held on until Julie pulled her by the hair. The fight ended with Mary and her male associates being escorted out by the bouncer. The next day, Gerry got a threatening phone call. The caller didn't identify themselves. The man on the line told Gerry that he had been late coming home from the lodge on the previous night. The man told Gerry that he had been sitting waiting for him. In another call, the same anonymous man told Gerry that he had a fine house and that it would be a pity to burn him out of it. Gerry was not feeling particularly threatened by these calls. He responded simply, telling the caller to fuck off and saying they would see who will burn who out of it. Gerry didn't know the voice on the other end of the line, but later discovered that the calls had come from an ex-boyfriend of Julie's, who had taken up with Mary Maguire. A few weeks later, the same man called Gerry again to tell him that he had now left Mary Maguire and to ask if they could put it all behind them. However, this would not be the end of the threats made against Gerry. On the 7th of April, the parish priest in Enniskillen, Monsignor Sean Cahill, received a phone call to the parochial house around 5 p.m. A male voice on the other end gave him a warning for Gerry McGinley. He said Gerry was to leave the area by midnight. They told the priest it was because of what they referred to as Gerry's antisocial behaviour. The priest didn't know who Gerry McGinley was, so he rang the police. The parochial house phone soon rang again. This time it was another local priest, Father McGorty in Irvinstown. He said he had also received a call threatening McGinley. Sergeant Angela Linton travelled to the McGinleys' home at around 6:30 p.m. that evening to make Gerry aware of the threats made against him. Gerry seemed surprised to hear the news. Julie had been standing at the back door of the house during the conversation. She came over and asked Sergeant Linton about the purpose of her visit. The sergeant told her she had given Gerry some news, and it was up to him if he wanted to tell Julie. Gerry told his wife about the threats made against him. Sergeant Linton noticed Julie was agitated by them. Linton knew that Gerry was angry, but he did not direct his anger towards her. Instead, he got into his lorry and left, driving from the yard quickly. Later that evening, Gerry called to the police station. He was looking for more information about who had sent the threats. A code word Sean had been used during the phone call, which indicated a link to the real IRA. But when Gerry asked, the constable on duty that night would not confirm which paramilitary organisation the threat had come from. Not taking the warning too seriously, Gerry decided to spend the night at his home. However, he sent Julie and the children to her father's. He believed that the threats came from a man Julie had been seeing during their separation. Gerry decided he would go and confront this man in person, but he couldn't find him. The next day, the girls had returned home when Gerry received another call. The person on the other end claimed to be a member of the real IRA. The man told Gerry that he had been told to leave, and that he better leave, or they would take care of him and his family. Although Gerry believed the threats were a hoax, he was concerned for the safety of his children. This time, he sent them to stay at his family home in Manor Hamilton for a week. Gerry's brother Harry described him as a devoted dad, while Julie said he basically idolised his daughters. He would often take the girls to see their grandmother Betty in Leitrim, and on days he didn't visit home he would call his parents on the phone. Gerry had worked for his father's haulage company for a few years before setting up his own company, and was instilling that love of lorries in his own daughters, always bringing them with him when he went to refuel. On the 25th of April, 2 weeks after the family were reunited in Derryrahan, Julie saw a vehicle around their home, with a man and 2 children inside. She called the police to report it. Gerry also spotted a man he didn't recognise passing his house on numerous occasions. The McGinleys' bungalow in Derryrahan was easily overlooked by a nearby hill. In June, Gerry's neighbour noticed a light blue Toyota with a Sligo registration plate pulled in at the top of this hill. The neighbour noticed an elderly man in the car, appearing to peer down the hill, seemingly watching the McGinley home. While on holiday in Gran Canaria between the 28th of May and the 4th of June 2000, Julie made a phone call home to a friend, 44-year-old Michael Monaghan. Monaghan was also married with a young son, and in the summer of 1999, he had replied to Gerry's ad selling a German Shepherd in the newspaper. The two had crossed paths again a few times after this, and they had remained in contact, with Michael, Julie and Gerry all gradually becoming close. Soon, Michael Monaghan and the McGinleys had plans to go into business together and open a furniture shop later that summer. When Julie called Michael from Gran Canaria, she was distressed. She told him Gerry had dragged her onto the apartment balcony and threatened to throw her over the edge. Monaghan told Julie that he would sort something out. Monaghan had a previous conviction for assault causing acute bodily harm when he was 19. He disliked Gerry's treatment of Julie, and later told a friend that he has hit her for the last time. Julie would later say Gerry physically assaulted her on several occasions, and once smashed his car into her car's rear passenger door. She described her husband as having a volatile, domineering and often violent nature. One such incident was witnessed by two neighbours of the McGinleys. They called to Gerry's friend, another neighbour called Robert Elliott, to see if he would come with them to the McGinleys to calm Gerry down. Elliott told them not to get involved and not to call the police. It could be only a storm in a teacup, he said, and it would be best to leave them alone. Elliott knew that Gerry would most likely be enraged if the police were called to his door. Gerry McGinley had a serious criminal past and a long-running dislike and distrust of the police. In 1986, he had been sentenced to 9 years in prison for the rape of a Garda's wife in Cavan. He always maintained it had been a case of consensual sex, and his conviction was a miscarriage of justice, all because the victim's husband was a Garda. For local members of the Gardaí in Cavan and Leitrim, it was hard to forget his history. After serving his time in Arbour Hill and Castlereagh prisons, Gerry decided to settle across the border in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh. After this, in 1994, in an Enniskillen car mechanics, Gerry met Julie Bracken, a young Protestant woman from the town. Gerry was strongly built and a fit man, a Connacht champion boxer, and together with the attractive blonde Julie, the two made a handsome couple. Julie's father was said to be unhappy with the relationship, but 7 months after they met, the pair married. They had 2 daughters and eventually moved into their bungalow in Derryrahan. Gerry had a fiery temper, one his mother Betty thought he got from her. It often made his relationships fractious and led to him building up more than his fair share of enemies. In 1998, there was an attempted poisoning of a pony belonging to the McGinleys. Gerry was suspicious that his neighbour, Willie Edwards, knew something about it. Gerry was later seen parked outside a nearby church during an Orange Order service, which Edwards was known to attend. Gerry had told another neighbour that he was going to pull Edwards out of the pew. Another time, Gerry saw Edwards' Land Rover on the road and had chased him, shaking his fist towards the car and banging on the door. Gerry later told a friend that he had hired a hitman to kill Willie Edwards. On June 6th, roughly 2 months after the anonymous threatening calls began, Gerry was driving his wife's dark blue BMW through Black Lion, County Cavan. As he passed through the village, he came across upwards of 16 uniformed Gardaí stood along the road outside the Garda station. They flagged him down, forcing him to stop. The Gardaí then set about searching his car for drugs. Gerry reacted aggressively, shouting that he was being hassled or set up. Gerry was arrested and brought to Manor Hamilton Garda station, a 20-minute journey, during which Gerry sang Republican songs and threatened one Garda in the car, Niall Davey, that he would have him shot. Davey said that when they arrived at the station, Gerry jumped up and ran forcibly at the wall of the office, headbutting the wall, causing an injury to his head. It transpired that a tip-off had come into Gardaí, that a large quantity of drugs worth £10,000 would be crossing the border in a Navy BMW, and the driver of the car would be Gerry McGinley. Nothing was found on his person, but a small package was found in the car. Some of this was simply cooking spices, but there was a minor amount of drugs found with a street value of £800. The next day, Gerry gave a statement to the guards. He told them about his brief separation from his wife, the fight on St. Patrick's Day with Mary Maguire, the threatening calls that followed, and the threats from the IRA. Although he refused to become a tout, he did tell them of various drug dealers he knew from Enniskillen, some of whom he had seen passing his house. He also told the guards about his suspicions that someone was out to get him. Gerry was charged with simple possession of cannabis resin and released on bail. The charge would carry a penalty of a fine, and Gerry was told there was no question of a prison sentence. Determined to prove that he had been set up, he continued to call the Garda station. During one of these calls, he spoke to Garda Pauline McDonough. She happened to be his mother's cousin, although she would say she wouldn't have known Gerry if she had met him on the street. During multiple phone calls with Garda McDonough, Gerry desperately argued that he had been set up and that the drugs had been planted. During one of these calls, Gerry was told that the sergeant over the drugs unit would not be recommending a prosecution. Gerry was pleased to hear that someone seemed to believe that he had been set up. Gerry's focus was on the identity of the informant. He was agitated and annoyed that he had not been told. He was by then receiving silent phone calls and was worried about the various criminals who could potentially be involved. There seemed to be multiple possible explanations or suspects who might have caused to frame Gerry. He gave McDonough a list of 5 or 6 names to check out in the event anything was to happen to him. One name on the list was Mary Maguire, his ex-girlfriend, who he and Julie had fought with at the Fort Lodge Hotel. Another was the ex-boyfriend of Julie's, who had made some threatening phone calls. Gerry was eager to find out who had tipped the Gardaí off and had been making his own inquiries. Once, while speaking to Gardaí, Gerry hung up suddenly. When he rang Garda McDonough back, he explained that Julie had walked into the room and he believed she could be involved in the setup. He told Garda McDonough that his wife was unfaithful and wanted him out of the way. On the 9th of August 2000, Gerry once again called the station in Manor Hamilton and spoke to Garda Niall Davey. Gerry told him that he knew the whole story and that he and some people he knew were going to sort the whole thing out and he would clear his name. On Saturday, the 12th of August, at around 10:30 a.m, Gerry called into his mother's house on his way back from having his lorry MOT'd in Sligo. He had also renewed the tax on the lorry at a cost of £3,000. His mother Betty wanted him to have something to eat, knowing he'd have been up early that morning, but he just took bread and a banana as he wanted to get back. Later that day, he saw his father on the road, and the two had a chat on the phone before going about their day. Gerry went shopping in Dunn's stores and he bought a long-sleeved blue shirt, black shoes and a pair of jeans for £42, paid by cheque. He was seen in this outfit later that day by his friend Robert Elliott, who had stopped by to make plans for Gerry to drive one of Robert's vintage lorries at a festival the following week. Gerry and Julie had plans to go out that night, and Julie, although not particularly anxious to go out, had been searching for a babysitter. She had called to the home of Patricia McGirr earlier that morning to see if she could mind the 2 young girls. When Patricia told Julie she was unavailable, her mother, Mary McGirr, offered to take the McGinley girls into her house for the evening and mind them there, but Julie declined. Gerry then got in touch with Heather Edwards at around 9 p.m. to ask her. Although she didn't often babysit for the McGinleys, Heather agreed, and Gerry made the half-a-mile drive to collect her. At 10:30 p.m, Gerry called Michael Monaghan, who had been watching TV at the home of his friend PJ McPadden, and invited them out for a drink. A few weeks earlier, despite Michael Monaghan's dislike of Gerry's treatment of his wife, he had set up a furniture shop together with the couple, called Furniture Direct in the Tempo Road Business Park in Enniskillen. The new business partners all decided to meet at the Fort Lodge Hotel, along with Monaghan's friend, PJ McPadden. The couple left around 11 p.m. when the girls were already asleep, with promises of being home no later than 1 a.m. Then they headed out to meet Michael and PJ, who had walked through town to the hotel bar. The men each had around half a dozen pints of beer, and the others out in the Fort Lodge that night who saw Gerry regarded him as in good spirits. At around 2:30 a.m, the babysitter, Heather, heard the car coming up the road. Julie came into the house through the front hall. She was alone. She told Heather that she hadn't been able to get Gerry to leave and had tried to ring from the hotel to explain that they would be later than they thought. Heather told her that the phone hadn't rung. Julie went down the hall and played a voicemail, although Heather couldn't hear when it had been left. Julie said that Heather must have nodded off, and then offered to drive her home. As they were heading out to the car, Heather asked Julie where her husband was, and was told he was around the back. Heather got into the passenger seat of the car, and as she looked up, she could see a man walking around the corner of the house. Her view was obscured by the McGinley's transit van. She couldn't make out who it was, but as he stepped into the house, she could see that he was wearing a white t-shirt, not the blue long-sleeved shirt Gerry had left in. The next day, Sunday, August 13th, Heather Edwards, the babysitter, arrived back to the McGinley home with her sister. It was around 12:50 p.m. She was there to return a quad bike she had borrowed from Gerry and Julie's daughter. As they approached, Julie came out of the house with the children to meet them. Usually they would have been invited in, but this time they weren't asked. Julie seemed eager to get rid of the sisters, and told them she was in a hurry to go to her father's house. Heather Edwards noticed that two men were outside the home, Michael Monaghan and his friend PJ McPadden. They were standing at the bottom of the slope leading into the backyard. Monaghan's van was parked nearby. Not long after, at 1 o'clock, Robert Elliott also called to the McGinleys. When he pulled his Land Rover into the yard, Julie came running from the back door. She told him through his open window that Gerry was away and that she was in a hurry making dinner and minding the children. At 3 p.m. that day, Gerry's brother, Harry McGinley, and his fiancée went to Mullen Mart in Enniskillen with their daughter. When Harry went back to the car to get his wallet, he saw Julie arriving in her Vauxhall Cavalier with her daughters. He noticed she was not looking at all like her usual self. Usually, Julie was well presented and wore makeup. Harry thought on that day that his sister-in-law looked tired. She wasn't looking for anything in particular and told him she didn't know why she was there. He then saw her walk directly to a stall selling bedclothes, make her purchase, and head back out the gate. 2 days later, on Tuesday the 15th of August, Michael Murphy, who had a farm neighbouring the McGinleys, recorded in his daily diary that he noticed a bonfire in behind their house. At around 10 p.m. on that Tuesday night, Julie rang her father-in-law, Gerry Sr. She asked him if any of her husband's friends were home from England. When he asked her why, she said Gerry had disappeared. Julie told him that she was woken by Gerry in the early hours of Sunday morning after their night out in the Fort Lodge. He was moving around their bedroom, packing clothes into a plastic bag. He had become paranoid about the drugs charge and decided that the Gardaí were out to get him, telling her, "I am going. You don't know how they work." He took £1,000 cash, and at around 7 a.m, a man Julie didn't know arrived at their home to pick Gerry up, then headed off in a blue Toyota with a southern registration plate. Julie told her father-in-law how she tried to talk him out of leaving, but Gerry told her he had to go and would phone her later. Gerry McGinley Sr. had already been trying to contact his son for 3 days by the time Julie told him that he had vanished. His parents were used to him checking in daily by phone, if not in person. He never went anywhere without his phone. Now, it was left behind in the bungalow, and Gerry was nowhere to be found. As the days passed, concerns for Gerry McGinley began to grow. However, Julie reckoned that those who were concerned about Gerry had the wrong end of the story. She thought that the drugs charge in Cavan had bothered him more than he had let on. On Thursday, August 17th, 4 days after Gerry had left, his father and brother called to Furniture Direct to speak to Michael Monaghan and see what he knew. Over a cup of tea, Monaghan told them that he had not seen Gerry since the previous Saturday evening, when they had locked up the furniture shop together. That same day, Sergeant William Stevenson from Ballina-Mallard Police Station called to the McGinley home in relation to an £80 fine owed by Gerry. Julie paid him the money and told him Gerry had gone away for a while. He hadn't called, and Julie told the sergeant that she found this strange, as he was always on the phone to someone. She said she had received 2 phone calls on the Tuesday gone, which might have been him, but the line was very poor. The sergeant suggested reporting him missing, but Julie refused his offer. She told him that her father-in-law had warned her that Gerry would be upset if he found out she had gotten the police involved. Later that day, when Gerry Sr. asked Julie about going to the police, she told him that Sergeant Stevenson had told her she would have to wait a week as Gerry was an adult. When she was pressed by the McGinleys and her own father to report her husband missing, Julie explained that she was afraid of Gerry's reaction if he reappeared and knew she had involved the police. Gerry Sr., aware of his son's various enemies and the threats against him, asked Julie if she really thought he would come back, saying, "Sure isn't he dead, Julie?" Julie had no reaction. The McGinley's neighbour, Robert Elliott, told Julie that if she didn't contact the police, he would. Eventually, Robert convinced her that he would take the blame if Gerry was angry. And on the 18th of August, 5 days after he had left, Julie reported Gerry missing. The next day, Saturday the 19th, Gerry's 2 brothers, Harry and James, headed to Black Lion to collect the lorry which Gerry had sold, to deliver it to Armagh. While stuck in traffic in Enniskillen, Harry saw his brother's car coming towards him from the opposite direction. He could only see the driver's face. But it was not Gerry. There were 2 men in the car he didn't recognise. Upon their return journey, they saw the car again. Harry jumped out of the lorry. He strained to see who was in the car. This time, he could see who was driving. It was Julie. But Harry could not make out the passengers. As soon as Julie reported Gerry missing, the police took the matter very seriously, because of the paramilitary threats against him. Within 2 days of being reported missing, the police had carried out inquiries locally, as well as searches of the area surrounding his home. They drafted in detectives from outside the area to assist, and informed Gardaí across the border. Searches were launched, combining the bogs and the fields around his home. Divers from the RUC's underwater search team donned wetsuits and searched the murky waters of Ballydoola Loch, about a mile away from Gerry's home. Countless statements were taken and typed up. Travel records were checked to ensure that Gerry had not flown or taken a ferry abroad. Gerry's close friends in England were contacted, and appeals for anyone with any information to come forward were featured in national newspapers. One such report from the Fermanagh Herald at the time posed 2 questions to readers. Did you see Mr. McGinley and his wife in the Fort Lodge Hotel on the night of Saturday 12th of August this year, or at any time during the early hours of the 13th? And, Did you know Gerry McGinley, and or have you information which might help to shed light on his disappearance? Gerry's picture was featured on milk cartons as part of a wider missing persons campaign by supermarket chain Iceland. 3 reported sightings of Gerry came in after these appeals. All 3 were investigated, but none were confirmed as being the missing man. Gerry's mother, Betty McGinley, spent her time reading newspapers and watching the news, waiting for news of her son. Not knowing was the worst part for her. She urged anyone who knew something to come forward and ease the heartbreak. Detective Sergeant Trevor Stevenson visited the McGinleys' bungalow on the 20th of August, a week after Gerry had gone missing. As Julie let him into the bungalow, she explained that she had been living with her father since Gerry's disappearance. Detective Sergeant Stevenson asked if he could be shown the bedroom where she had last seen her husband and the drawer from which he took the £1,000 on the morning of his disappearance. First, she took the sergeant to her children's bedroom, where they paused and looked out the window. Then she brought him through to the master bedroom. Stevenson looked at the bed. It appeared to be brand new, and on top sat a folded, uncovered duvet and 2 pillows and new bed linen. The room also smelled of fresh paint. As he left the room, D.S. Stevenson noticed the carpet. It was not properly tacked into the skirting, and in the corner there was a noticeable gap. And there were no doors on the wardrobes. 2 days later, the police arrived back to look for signs of an abduction. A few minutes after they had begun their search, Julie pulled Detective Inspector Neil Graham aside and asked to speak to him in private. She began to tell him about her concern for her husband's well-being and his previous association with members of criminal and Republican groups. She told him they had faced money issues since setting up their business. The couple had debts of over £76,000. This included £3,000 owed to Julie's father, £7,000 for fuel, and £36,000 on their mortgage. Julie was the beneficiary of a life assurance policy worth £250,000. The policy had been upgraded in October 1999 as a result of an incentive by the company at the time. When asked about the bedroom redecoration, she said it was undertaken the same week her husband went missing. The house was up for sale and the redecoration was on account of that. D.S. Graham recalled she made no bones about it. According to Julie, it was something that she and Gerry had been planning for a while. Julie had repainted her bedroom, while their friend P.J. McPadden had replaced the carpet. She said the old carpet had been put in the van of their business partner, Michael Monaghan, to be taken to the dump. She told the police her husband's work meant his boots had dirtied the carpet and it needed to be replaced. The bed had been put up for resale in the furniture shop. The doors on the wardrobe had been taken down by Gerry, and he was getting new doors made by someone, but Julie didn't know who, and she didn't know where the old doors had been put. No one came forward when police appealed for information from anyone working on new wardrobe doors for Gerry McGinley. Julie was annoyed at the questions being asked of her and insisted that her concern was around Gerry's unsavoury associates who were known to the police. As they began to gather information, police began to have grave concerns for Gerry's safety. Detective Superintendent Brian MacArthur, one of Northern Ireland's most senior and experienced detectives, said, "For him to disappear so suddenly would be totally out of character." On August 24th, the police upgraded the status of the investigation from missing person to suspicious disappearance. Betty McGinley, Gerry's mother, lit a candle daily as she prayed for her son's safe return. She would say, "Padre Pio isn't listening at the minute. He's a bit deaf this weather. But if anyone can swing it, he could." Julie issued a plea for people to come forward with information and told the Belfast Telegraph that while she fears the worst, she is still hopeful she may see her husband again. She said, "I know hope can be fading at times, but at the same time you can only but hope. You can't do much else." The more police investigated the case of Gerry McGinley's disappearance, the more their suspicions grew. On the 26th of August, nearly 2 weeks after Gerry disappeared, Constable Barr from Enniskillen Police Station went to Gerry and Julie's bungalow without a warrant on the request of Gerry Sr. to look for a part missing from one of the lorries, an iron bar. He knocked on the door, but Julie was not home. When there was no answer, Constable Barr walked around the back of the house. There he found the part lying in the backyard, and he placed it in a bag to return it to Gerry Sr. As he was placing the bar in the bag, he noticed the remains of a fire nearby. In the ashes, he could see hinges, like those from flat-pack furniture or the doors of a press, and the charred remains of clothes, what looked like a blue shirt and jeans. Barr remembered that Gerry was wearing a similar outfit when he was last seen. He also found a watch of a similar make and model as the next watch Gerry had been wearing. It had stopped somewhere between 3:35 and 3:40. Constable Barr found it strange. A watch, he thought, is not the sort of thing you would burn, even if broken. He thought again of the iron bar. Could it be a murder weapon? Police intensified their efforts. The RUC had 24 detectives working on the case, 10 of whom were brought in from the Regional Crime Squad in Derry. It was an approach similar to a murder inquiry. They believed that a murder had occurred, but they needed to be able to prove a death before any formal interviews could take place. A special incident room was established in Enniskillen RUC station and by Gardaí across the border. When DS Stevenson arrived back to Derry Rahan the next day, Julie told him she had seen a solicitor and had been advised not to answer any more questions. He told her that it was within everyone's right not to answer questions, but reminded her he was only trying to find her husband. He asked Julie what Gerry had taken with him when he left abruptly. Since he and Julie had reunited, Gerry had not been without his wedding ring, but, like his phone, it was left in the house. DS Stevenson then asked Julie about the fire, and she told him that she had lit it a couple of weeks previously. She did not remember what she had burned in the fire, just rubbish, she said. When pressed, she said nothing from the bedroom had been burned. The fire and the redecoration of the bedroom had instilled the police with a fear that critical evidence was potentially being destroyed. They knew they had to move quickly. The evidence they had amassed to that point was largely circumstantial, but pointed in one direction. Their suspicions led them to believe Julie may have played some role in Gerry's disappearance, but they weren't ready to make an arrest. Without a body, the bar to reach to make an arrest was high, and they had yet to get there. Instead, they continued their investigation. They seized and searched Michael Monaghan's van. Inside, they found brown parcel wrap covered with cellophane, which had a small blood stain on it. Forensic examinations found that one of the DNA samples taken from this wrap was a match to Gerry McGinley. The chances of an error were 1 in a billion. However, the tests could not determine if it was blood, sweat, or saliva that caused the transfer of DNA. And there was a potentially plausible explanation. Because while his own van was in police custody, Michael Monaghan drove a van belonging to Gerry. There were scraps of paper found in Monaghan's van. Some of these had phone numbers on them, for Gerry and for the furniture shop. There were also numbers for a man named Tony McNairn. This name was familiar to police and to Gardaí across the border. Tony McNairn was the man who had called in the tip that drugs would be found in Gerry McGinley's car. Some of the other pieces of paper found contained handwritten notes and which spoke of love and protection. Though scribbled through, some phrases were still legible. One note read, There's not 1 minute of every day that goes by that you are not in my mind, and told the reader not to worry if anything goes wrong. Steve Maxwell, a forensic handwriting expert, reviewed 2 pages of notes and determined that they had been written by Michael Monaghan. And he could see who the notes were addressed to: Julie McGinley. A phone recovered from the van showed a text received that April. It read, "Mick, I love you. XXXJ." During the first 6 months, police spoke to 700 people, took 493 statements, and compiled 673 documents. Slowly, as they began to build up a picture of what had happened to Gerry McGinley, they began to reveal a number of sordid details about his life. They learned about his rape conviction and his suicide attempt. They learned about the IRA threats against him and the drugs bust in the Republic. They learned about his work, his family, his brief separation from his wife and the fallout that came after it. And then they began to learn more about the couple's sex life. Harry McGinley, Gerry's brother, told them about one occasion around Halloween where he saw Julie flirting with the owner of the Fort Lodge. Later that same night, he saw his sister-in-law wiggling about with the bouncer at the hotel, who put his hand up her skirt. When Harry confronted her, she asked him not to tell Gerry, that they were friends and she had been a friend of the bouncer for a long time. This was not the only incident at the Fort Lodge that the police learned about. Julie had seduced a number of prominent figures in the community in the hotel. Farmers, businessmen, part-time police officers. She would bring each one back to a room in the hotel to continue their night together. There, in the room, unbeknownst to the men, Gerry would have video cameras set up. He would film the men having sex with his wife without their knowledge. Then he would send them the tape. If they wanted to keep the video hidden, the men were told they would need to pay Gerry. Some had been asked to pay for as much as £10,000. When news of Gerry McGinley's disappearance became public, these men panicked, desperate to keep these tapes and their identities hidden. Detectives believed there were at least 19 of these tapes. In October of 2000, 2 months after Gerry went missing, a woman named Lulu McElroy was sitting at home having a drink. As she sat there, Lulu saw an appeal from Betty McGinley for information about her son. Betty had taken to getting into her car, driving all around the back roads of Fermanagh, hoping for what she called divine inspiration. One day, she was driving along when she saw a lorry similar to her son's. Overcome with emotion, Betty nearly crashed the car. Her health declined following her son's disappearance, and she spent time in hospital. Josephine Lulu McElroy and her husband were good friends of Michael Monaghan, and he often called to their home. On occasion, Monaghan had talked to her about Gerry McGinley, calling him a psychopath and a schizo. On the 14th of August, just 2 days after Gerry went missing, Lulu received a phone call from Monaghan. He was laughing down the phone as he told her, "He's gone." When she asked who he was referring to, he told her Gerry McGinley had gotten into a car with men early the previous morning. When Lulu said he would probably come back, Monaghan told her, "Fuck him. He got what was coming to him." A month after Gerry's disappearance, Lulu had gone along to the McGinley home with her husband, who was mowing the lawn for Julie. The two women went inside the bungalow, and Julie showed Lulu into the main bedroom, where she pointed out the black fingerprint dust, the holes in the walls and the skirting boards that had been taken off by police as part of their search. Lulu recognised the new curtains as being ones she had previously owned and given to Michael Monaghan. While she didn't say anything at the time, it stuck with Lulu. The next day, when she was in the furniture shop alone with Julie, the topic of the curtains came up, and Julie told her, "I got those curtains from you a good while ago." When Lulu said that wasn't true, Julie said, "If they ask you, you say that. If you don't, you will be done as an accessory." Julie also asked her if she had ever been to jail and what it was like. Lulu had 43 previous convictions and told Julie that in her experience it was okay. Julie said, "Well, them cunts is going to put me in." Lulu told her that they would need evidence to put her in jail, and they spoke briefly about Michael Monaghan's van, which had been seized by the police. Julie wasn't too concerned about the van, as Gerry was fucking in and out of them anyway. Lulu decided to go to the police and tell them what she knew. What she told them would help bridge gaps between seemingly disconnected events, or events whose connections weren't clear until then. Lulu not only told the police what Julie had said, she also spoke about Michael Monaghan. She spoke about a conversation she had had with him before Gerry went missing, where Michael had told her that he had paid a man named Tony McNairn £500 to get Gerry sorted. Tony McNairn was the informant who had tipped off the guards about Gerry crossing the border with a substantial quantity of drugs. When Gerry came away without any major charges, Monaghan told Lulu that he had arranged for another man to get rid of him. Another friend of Monaghan's, Patrick Owens, also spoke to the police. He recalled how Monaghan had said Gerry McGinley would eventually be found pushing up heather on a Leitrim mountain. Evidence was starting to pile up, but police still needed a body or a murder weapon before they could arrest anyone. Julie, who had previously been working in the phone shop BT in Enniskillen, had been on sick leave with migraines since her husband's disappearance. She had moved out of the home she had shared with Gerry and across the border to a rented house near Lifford in County Donegal from October to December 2000. Her daughters were enrolled in the local national school. Together with Michael Monaghan, she rented a shop unit in Castlefin, County Donegal, and briefly set up a furniture shop, although it didn't fare well and closed after a few short months. The first Christmas after Gerry disappeared, there was a phone call to the McGinley house. Gerry Sr. answered the call. It was Michael Monaghan. A number of people matching the description of the McGinleys had been looking for Monaghan. He was afraid for his life and had reported the matter to the police. Monaghan asked Gerry Sr. to call off his men. When he addressed it, Gerry Sr. told him he had been wound up and no one was looking for him. Gerry Sr. told Monaghan that, "When I come looking for you, it won't be somebody else ringing the bell." He asked then what Monaghan knew about the case. Monaghan told him, "I don't know what Julie's been up to." Monaghan promised to share the names of the men who were after Gerry, telling the missing man's father, "It wasn't a professional hit, you know." All of Gerry Sr.'s hopes of finding his son alive were dashed. To him, it was a confirmation. His son was dead. Gerry's mother, Betty, shifted her focus from one day finding her son to the grim task of simply finding his remains. She issued an appeal to the public, and in particular targeting those who wouldn't speak to the police, asking them to break that barrier and let her and her family out of jail. Gerry's parents began to visit clairvoyants, hoping that it would offer them some answers and help to find him. Gerry Sr. described this as clutching at straws. One such clairvoyant told the family that he was buried in a wooded area. As the months went on, the police continued to build their case. In March of 2001, police decided to search the flat of PJ McPadden, the friend of Michael Monaghan's who went drinking with the McGinleys on the night of Gerry's disappearance. McPadden was originally from Ballinamore, County Leitrim, but had moved to Enniskillen and was living in a flat there with Michael Monaghan, who had moved out of his family home. During a search of the flat, police found a copy of the Sunday World from the day Gerry disappeared, It was a version only available in the Republic of Ireland, not one available to PJ in his local area. This suggested he may have been over the border on that particular day. A forensic examination of the house in Derryrahan was also undertaken. Senior forensic scientist Donna Knowles examined the house and found limited blood traces in the master bedroom. And when Knowles examined the children's bedroom, she found several small spots of blood on a jewellery box. Julie had insisted her two daughters were minded at home the night Gerry went missing, meaning the two girls were asleep in their room on the night their father vanished. Knowles also found a semen stain on a nightie belonging to Julie McGinley. That was not a match for her husband. Although the tests were not definitive, the sample could match the man that Julie had been seeing during their separation. Another sample found on the mattress could match Michael Monaghan. Tests were able to determine that the sample could only have been left after the disappearance of Gerry McGinley. Mrs. Margaret O'Donoghue, the manager of the business park where their furniture shop was, also spoke to police. She told them how one Friday evening in July, a month before Gerry went missing, she looked out through the slat in the blinds and saw a couple passionately embracing in a car. She could see the man's backside. The woman had blonde hair. At the time, Mrs. O'Donoghue didn't know who it was, but later she realised that woman was likely Julie McGinley. The man was Michael Monaghan. It was broad daylight on a summer evening. Curiosity got the better of Mrs. O'Donoghue, and she couldn't help but watch. She later said she was shocked at their lack of shame. As they investigated, police discovered that Julie had 5 mobile phones, 1 in a fake name and 2 in the names of former colleagues. They also discovered that Monaghan had 4 phones. One of these phones contained graphic romantic text messages. Of more interest to police, there were also a series of phone calls made between Julie and Michael, as well as Michael's friend PJ McPadden on the night of the 13th of August, the night when Gerry disappeared, with the calls going on until close to 3:30 in the morning. Police also learned that Julie had applied for Australian citizenship and obtained both an Irish driving licence and a forged English licence under the name Anne-Marie Martin. A false licence in the name of Michael Lynch was also discovered. By now, the police investigation had been extensive, and the circumstantial evidence was starting to mount. But they were still no closer to finding Gerry. Divers had searched quarries and lakes across Ulster with no success. The RUC rarely ever arrested people on suspicion of murder without a body. However, on account of such an abundance of circumstantial evidence, the police were prepared to make an unusual decision. It was time to act on their suspicions. In March of 2001, they arrested Julie McGinley for the murder of her husband. They also arrested Michael Monaghan and PJ McPadden. One significant line of inquiry for police during questioning was the possibility of an affair between Julie McGinley and Michael Monaghan. After denying an affair for over 8 hours, Monaghan eventually admitted, "I did have sex with Julie McGinley. The reason I didn't tell you was because I was trying to save the marriage I have, what is left of it." He refused to answer questions about when the affair began. He corrected police who referred to Gerry McGinley as being murdered, instead describing him as missing. When asked what would happen if Julie's husband was to return, Monaghan said, "I'm in trouble." All 3 were brought before the court. All 3 denied the charges put to them. Michael Monaghan, for his part, replied, "I did not kill Gerard McGinley, and I can put my hand on my heart and say my conscience is clear." The arrest of Julie McGinley, Michael Monaghan and PJ McPadden for the murder of Gerry McGinley was one of the first times the RUC had arrested someone on suspicion of murder without a body. In court, Julie's solicitor, Mr. Donald Fee, pointed out that no body or murder weapon had been found, despite the charge of murder and disposal of a body. Detective Superintendent Brian MacArthur agreed that this was correct, but he did not agree with Mr. Fee's suggestion that this meant no crime was committed. He described to the court how, in the absence of a body, a significant investigation was undertaken to find any trace of Gerry McGinley alive and well somewhere else. He also told the court that, while the evidence is of a circumstantial nature, the amount of circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Later, at their bail hearing, one key witness, Lulu McElroy, passed on her fears to police about what would happen if bail was granted. She had spoken to Michael Monaghan's wife Patricia, who accused her of telling lies to the police. Julie and Michael were denied bail. PJ McPadden was granted bail, but could not match the £5,000 fee required. Searches for Gerry's remains continued as the case was being put together. Finding a body could provide a wealth of new evidence and information for the prosecution, while the absence of a body lent weight to the main defence, that Gerry McGinley had not been murdered. He was simply missing, they could argue. This was a man with a lot of enemies. His neighbour, Julie's ex-boyfriends, local criminals, the guards in Cavan, the IRA. He often went missing for periods of time. He had a history of mental health struggles. Without a body, it could be argued that there had been no murder at all. On the 3rd of June 2001, Amanda O'Connell, her sister Lisa Byrne, and her niece Michelle were out walking in Potter Woods in Leitrim. They were planning to gather some moss for their mother to use in hanging baskets. Young Michelle had wandered further in from the path, some 200 yards from a nearby access road near some overturned trees. Suddenly, Michelle's voice broke the quiet peace of the forest. "Mammy, there's a skeleton here." Hidden by the toppled trees in the area, wrapped tightly in heavy plastic sheeting, often used to line ponds, were decomposing human remains. The plastic had been gnawed on in parts. Scattered on top of the remains were small animal bones and decaying organic matter. A pair of tan work boots were also found with the body, but there was no trace of blood. For Gerry's father, who had covered miles of ground searching for his son, hearing of the discovery was a relief. After 10 months of searching almost daily, working only twice a week, he and Gerry's mother Betty were now confident that Gerry had been found. They could end their search and begin their mourning. The remains were so decomposed that they were identified through dental records. Assistant State Pathologist Mary Cassidy travelled to Cavan Hospital to perform a post-mortem. She found that McGinley had been struck at least 3 times on the head. One of the blows was so severe that it knocked the brain sideways, fracturing the skull on the opposite side to where the blow had landed. There were 2 separate fractures to the lower left jaw. Cassidy was of the opinion that these were due to the severity of the blow to the right side. For this to be the case, his head would have had to have been resting on a firm surface. The injury to the right side of the face alone would not be life-threatening, but there could be a lot of bleeding from a broken nose. In an unconscious person, the blood can trickle down the throat and cause choking, leading to death. She also noted that the body had been stripped of clothes and personal effects to disguise the dead man's identity. Some of the bones of the hands and feet were missing due to exposure. She found no fractures to the forearms or hands, which suggested that Gerry McGinley had not tried to defend himself. It appeared he could have been attacked while he was asleep. The location of the discovery of Gerry McGinley's body in Potter Woods was just 6 miles from PJ McPadden's hometown. That proximity raised police suspicions, as did the copy of the newspaper found in his apartment, purchased in the Republic on the day Gerry went missing, and the phone calls on the night Gerry was last seen. However, his barrister, Mr. John Crudden, argued that there was no evidence that he had anything to do with Gerry McGinley's death, beyond removing and laying a new carpet. Although he had been living in Enniskillen for 5 years, McPadden hadn't known the McGinleys long, and he had no motive to kill Gerry. On the 17th of April 2002, due to insufficient evidence, McPadden walked free. The trial continued against Michael Monaghan and Julie McGinley. At one stage, the judge, Mr. Justice Kerr, forbid journalists covering the trial from using a picture of Julie McGinley carrying her book into court. The book's title, Gangsters, was clearly visible. The prosecution suggested that Michael Monaghan and Julie McGinley had been led by one of the most powerful motives for the murder of Gerry McGinley: a love affair. They told the court that their judgment had been clouded by passion, and in order to remove the obstacle in the way of their love affair, they had killed her husband. Mrs. McGinley appeared to wipe a tear from her eye as her barrister pointed out that the couple's 2 little girls were in the house on the night their father was allegedly murdered in his own bedroom. Finances were given as another motive. The McGinleys had a large debt before Gerry's murder, which his substantial life insurance policies would have covered. The court heard that after Gerry's disappearance, Julie asked Gerry's friend Robert Elliott for a loan of £1,000 or £2,000. He refused to lend her any money. When it came time for the defence to call their witnesses, both Julie and Michael Monaghan declined to take the stand. The defence also attempted to refute the claim of a passionate love affair by having Jacqueline Kingston testify that Monaghan had inquired about renting a flat from her in the same building as McPadden. Although Monaghan did not end up taking the flat, the defence used this to show that he was not living with Julie. Over 13 weeks, evidence and witnesses were brought before the court. Then, after a marathon trial, the jury went away to make their decision. After just 3 hours, they returned. They had reached a verdict. Julie McGinley and Michael Monaghan were found guilty. Monaghan's head fell as the guilty verdict was read out, and he rubbed his forehead with his hands. Gasps rippled around the courtroom. Julie, dressed in a red top and light grey trouser suit, showed no emotion, in contrast to the McGinley family, who wept openly. Tears fell from the eyes of 2 jurors as well, including the foreman who read out the verdict. Outside the courtroom, Gerry Sr. said the family was emotionally drained. "There's no winners," he said. "I get no pleasure from this. We're not looking for vengeance." At the sentencing hearing a few weeks later, both Monaghan and Julie appeared to have lost weight. The confidence that had carried Julie through the trial also seemed to have dissipated as she hung her head and wept. As he handed down life sentences to each, Mr. Justice Kerr said, "I believe that Michael Monaghan would not have become involved in such a heinous crime had he not met Julie McGinley." Speaking after the sentencing, Gerry McGinley's father spoke about the sadness he felt for his son's wife. He said, "She is still my daughter-in-law today, and that can't be changed. When they come out, their lives are over. They will be near pensioners." However, over the years, as stories of Julie's time in prison became known, Gerry Sr.'s attitude changed. One officer in Mahaberry prison was suspended when love letters from Julie McGinley were found in his locker. It was alleged that this was one of a number of illicit affairs in the prison. Gerry's parents described prison as being too easy for Julie, and criticised her for driving a wedge between the family and for her cruel and evil actions. In April 2005, during an appeal, Julie admitted that she was in the house while her husband was murdered. She claimed that while she had been in the children's bedroom the entire time, she had been told by Monaghan that there was an altercation instigated by Gerry. Gerry had lifted a bedside unit and thrown it at Michael, before trying to grab a baseball bat. Julie claimed that Monaghan had to keep hitting Gerry to stop him from killing everyone in the house, including the children. Julie claimed she did not share this information during the initial investigation due to an overwhelming sense of panic. Her appeal was unsuccessful. In their final decision, the 3 presiding judges said they were convinced Julie would lie and lie again to serve her own purpose. In January 2012, it was reported that Julie had found new love with a former TV producer with the BBC who was working on a project on her life in prison. She was released in 2015 and settled in Belfast, running a dog minding business. Michael Monaghan was released in 2017 after serving 15 years and found work as a gardener. In 2017, Gerry McGinley Sr. passed away, followed by his wife Betty in 2025. Gerry and Julie McGinley's 2 daughters were aged 7 and 5 when their mother was sent to jail for murdering their father. They are adults now who have had to grow up without either of their parents around. As their grandfather, Gerry McGinley Sr. said at the day of sentencing, "In the years to come they will have to be strong, but they will make it through." Thank you for listening to this episode of Lines of Enquiry. If you're on Instagram, please give us a follow at Lines of Enquiry Podcast. Or if you want to get in touch, why not email us at linesofenquiry@GoLoudNow.com. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have a story you think we should cover or just want to let us know how you felt about an episode. That email is linesofenquiry@GoLoudNow.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, leaving a rating or review really helps. We've now received almost 5,000 5-star ratings across Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Those responses make a real difference. They help new listeners find the series, and I am genuinely humbled by the response we've gotten. Thank you. Your support helps us to tell these stories. Make sure to like or follow the podcast in your podcast app and hit the notifications button so you'll know every time a new episode is released. Lines of Enquiry is presented by me, John Sweetman. The podcast is created by Darren Cleary. Our executive producer is Eoin Brennan. Our producers are Siobhan Maguire and Siobhan Walsh. Sound editing and design is by Neil Kavanagh, with additional editing support from Ed Smith. This episode was written by Siobhan Walsh and edited by Siobhan Walsh and Eoin Brennan. Social media, marketing, video and legal support comes from the GoLoud team. In the end, everything done in the dark comes to light.